Shooting on a TLR has a rather steep learning curve. Ever since getting hold of my TLR, I found myself studying things that I previously wouldn't even think about. At first, it was about getting used to this flipped vision in the viewfinder, and then it was about getting used to square format, and then now it is about getting the manual exposure correct. Well, welcome to this rabbit hole down the TLR lane. It's Belinda, and this is where we talk all about photography, from inspiration to camera techniques to editing skills so that you can take better photos. One of the main issues that photographers run into when shooting on a TLR, and especially shooting street photography on TLRs, is the absence of a light meter, and most of them would require you to set the exposure manually. So in this situation, it means that the only compass that you have is really your common sense, which I suppose is not very assuring. For some genres of photography, you can use an external light meter, or you can install some sort of on-camera light meter to help you work out exposure. But when we're talking about street photography, this doesn't really help us at all. By the time you've managed to meter the scene, the things would have changed, people would have moved, and you would have missed a shot. And so that's not gonna solve the problem either. Now, what I do personally is that I simply roll with the Sunny 16 rule. I take that as a starting point. I will then make specific adjustments based on what I see on the scene, using my experience with the camera as well as with photography in general. Okay, so very quickly, I'm gonna run you through what the Sunny 16 rule says, and then we're gonna move on and I'm gonna show you how I make it work in practice, because while it can sound like a piece of cake in theory, the application is really where you can get tripped up. So in this video, I'm gonna take you behind the scenes of the shots that I made earlier on in a roll of 120 HP5. And for your information, all of the shots were developed and scanned by myself using a Patterson tank, and then scanning them using a macro lens on my camera. If you want to know more about my process, watch this video here. I'm not going to repeat that in this video. Also, thanks to Dieter for raising this question a while ago on my channel, and so this video is made partly in response to your question. Okay, so here goes the theory. The Sunny 16 rule tells us that on a perfectly sunny day, if you set your aperture at f16, you will get the proper exposure by setting your shutter speed to 1 over your film speed. So in this case, for me, I'm shooting on the HP5, which is rated at ISO 400. So for me, I will have to set my shutter speed to 1 over 400 and aperture at f16 to get the perfect exposure. It works the same way with whatever film that you're shooting on. Let's say if you're shooting on a roll that's rated at ISO 200, it means you need a shutter speed of 1 over 200 paired with an aperture of f16. That's why it's called a Sunny 16 rule, to get the exposure perfect on a sunny day. Okay, so as far as the theory goes, that is pretty much it. And now, moving on to the practical side, we realize that we do come into some issues because, first of all, you don't always have the requisite shutter speed as an option on your TLR. With this TLR I have right over here, which is a Seagull, 1 over 400 is not an option. 1 over 300 is as fast as the shutter speed could go. So similarly, say that you're shooting on ISO 200, there is no 1 over 200 as the shutter speed. So now what do you do? As I've said, the Sunny 16 rule is more like a starting point for me, and this is where we need to start modifying the rule to fit the specific circumstance that we are in. In this case, ideally, I will need a shutter speed of 1 over 400. So let's first try to set the aperture to f16. What I would do is to just leave the shutter speed at 1 over 300. 1 over 300 is like around half a stop, more light than 1 over 400, which honestly doesn't quite matter because we're talking about film. Film definitely has a latitude to handle half a stop of overexposure. Now, the other consideration though is that, based on my experience, this lens here on a TLR tends to not let in that much light. So by overexposing my shot for half a stop, not only am I not actually doing any harm to the shot, in fact, I might be actually mitigating for the nature of this lens, which then brings me closer to what the exposure needs to be for this particular camera. Next up, this is where things can really start looking different for you. Now, I personally further lower the aperture number-wise to f11 because based on what I know about this camera, it does really need some assistance in terms of letting in enough light. So usually I walk out of the house with the aperture at f11 and the shutter speed at 1/300 if I'm shooting on a roll of film rated at ISO 400. There is simply no shortcut to this. I know my camera well enough to settle on these values, so feel free to work out what is yours with your camera. So this becomes my anchor for the day of shooting, which I would refer to from time to time based on a situation that I come into, and I will compare the values that I'm shooting on with this set of values that I have when I left home. Here is another tip for you. If you still feel a little bit uncomfortable with the numbers that you've just worked out based on the Sunny 16 rule, which can be vague, I acknowledge, what you can do before leaving the house is to test out these values on a digital camera and see what the image looks like. If it looks alright, then you can know for sure the values that you have on your TLR to begin with is correctly exposed. Having done that with the rest of the day, you can be confident that because the starting point is correct, if you keep referring back to that starting point, then your exposure couldn't be that far off. I love how the tree kind of grows into the building and how the specks of light hit onto people's dresses. So these are the settings that I had on the TLR. The choice of film here is the HP5 400, so the ISO is already set at 400. So as of now, the aperture on my camera is set at f8, paired with a shutter speed of 1/125. Let's begin with the aperture because there are quite a few other considerations apart from the exposure as to why I'm setting my aperture at f8. Now, first of all, it has to do with the style of photography that I shoot. For the kind of stuff that I shoot, ideally I would want most, if not all, of the frame to be in focus, and in order to do that, I would need a relatively smaller value on my aperture. In my opinion, I don't think I can go any lower than f8. Anything lower than that would create a substantial blur in either the foreground or the background, and I don't want that for the type of photos that I shoot on my TLR. The story with this scene was that the group of kids found this balloon, which belonged to the group of adults sitting behind. But the kids really wanted it, so they kept pestering and dancing around the balloon to a point where the adults finally offered to give it to them. And I wanted to capture the moment of joy when they found out that the balloon is finally for them. It was a tough job, really, knowing that I am 2 frames down and only have 10 more to go, while the kids were jumping around in excitement. I had a hard time battling with myself, and I'd really hate it if I had missed the entire shot because of indecisiveness. In a situation like this, there were quite a bit of strong highlights, though there was also an equal share of shadows. As with the situation in the previous 2 shots, I decided to prioritize the shadow detail and therefore raise the aperture to f8 as opposed to the f11, which was where I began. I just can't get over this. This is the epitome of the British desperation for the summer sun. For this shot, I lowered the aperture back to f11. This is because the majority of the frame were under direct sunlight. As for this shot, I again raised the aperture back to f8 because not only do we have shadows to take care of here, but the shadows actually are the points of interest. I want to still be able to see the texture of the grass that's in the shadow, and I also want to see the different shades of shadow cast on the house by the leaves. While I was composing the still shot, I already noticed the girls on the other end, and I knew that I wanted to get a shot of them. So I moved over, well, somewhat slightly awkwardly because I know they saw me, and started framing a shot with them hanging out in the front and the same shadow stuff going on at the back. So obviously for these shots, I did not change the settings on my camera, leaving the aperture at f8 and the shutter speed at 1/125. The lighting is pretty much constant at this garden, and even if you compare it with where I started, the balance between highlights and shadows weren't much different either. I was 10 frames in at this point when I saw the lovely pair. I instantly liked their outfits and asked them for a portrait. The focal length on my TLR was around 60mm, that's the 35mm equivalent, so I had to move back slightly to include 2 of them as well as the balloon in frame. As you can see, it was still bright at this point, though the direction of the sun has changed substantially and was barely hitting onto my subjects. I further lowered the aperture to f4, that's one more stop of light, knowing that I can deal with the shallower depth of field for portraits. Throughout the video, as you can see, I hardly made any changes to the settings on my TLR. Well, I mostly changed the aperture when I was doing the portraits, and then for the rest of the shots, I mostly made just minor adjustments based on what is in the scene. And this brings us to another tip I have for you. Start experimenting with your TLR on a bright day. Personally, I only shoot on a TLR on sunny days, because based on the settings that I'm willing to go for, namely a relatively small aperture and also a relatively fast shutter speed, the set of circumstances that would work with a setting combination like this is relatively narrow. And so, because of this, I am pretty much restricted to shooting under really good weather with my TLR, which I think is fair because each type of camera has their own time and place. And so, specifically in relation to the TLR, if you are looking to getting started, I would definitely recommend that you shoot on a day that you know is gonna be sunny and consistently sunny for a few hours straight. In that case, you wouldn't have to constantly make changes to the settings, which maximizes the chances of you getting the most of your roll correctly exposed. If you have any further questions as to how you use a TLR, check out this blog post I have here where I basically talk about how TLRs work, from how to load film, how to use it, and how to unload it. I also have a video here as a visual guide. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!